Here we go. I'm going to be talking about Robert F. Kennedy.
Oh, I wasn't ready for that.
Did you know that there was a second one?
Yeah, I wasn't aware. What happened to him? Does it turn out well?
Yeah. I mean, it can't be any worse than what happened to John F. Kennedy. As the devil once asked, who killed the Kennedys? Well, after all, it was you and me, and Lee Harvey Oswald and Sirhan Sirhan. In particular them, and all the second shooters. But it was all of us.
Turn yourself in.
Call your local cop. Run outside to the night watchman and...
The constable.
I've been a naughty boy constable. Please take me in. I assassinated Robert F. Kennedy. Oh, well.
Oh, crazy kids.
If you haven't heard, John F. Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963.
I've heard of such things.
Well, I didn't, okay? This is all very distressing to me. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated.
Yes.
On June 23rd, 1967 was the incident in Century City we talked about last month,
right,
where the visiting president, Lyndon B. Johnson's life was felt to be in peril due to stink bombs and cockroaches.
Supreme saved him, though.
This was during the country's first large-scale anti-Vietnam protest. Yeah. January 38th. The 60s were crazy. Even the months were on drugs. When will January end? Wake me when January ends. January 31st.
You need to take a deep breath.
January 31st of 1968 was the Tet Offensive, one of the bloodiest events of the Vietnam War. February 1968, Vietnam casualties took a steep increase, and they just kept going up, still to this day. March 1968 was the My Lai massacre, where U.S. troops killed 500 Vietnamese civilians. In April 1968, more troops were sent to Vietnam. There was violence at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and on the 4th of April, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, followed by race riots throughout the country. Yeah. Hopelessness and violence were the new law of the land. Welcome to The Walking Dead. Out of this came an episode 4, A New Hope. Robert Francis Kennedy. He was born November 20th, 1925 in Boston, Chowderland. He was the younger brother of John F. Kennedy. Like his brother, he got into politics and had actually been on the legal staff of the House Un-American Activities Committee in the 50s. Please don't hold that against him. Don't let one blemish on his record tarnish his reputation.
He didn't know what he was doing.
He thought it was cool to convict people from other countries. He went on to be JFK's campaign manager when he got elected both to the Senate in 1952 and as president in 1961, when he was rewarded for his service by being made Attorney General of the United States until his brother was killed, and in 1964 was elected as a Democratic senator from New York. RFK hated LBJ. And when it
didn't we all?
When it became clear that LBJ was not going to be running for re-election, partly because of what happened in Century City, RFK decided to throw his chowder in the ring and decided to run for president. Early on in his campaign, on March 26, 1968, he even gave a speech at San Fernando Valley College, now CSUN. Unfortunately, the Kennedy family has some sort of weird pall cast over them, as we know, maybe from the activities of their patriarch, Joseph P. Kennedy, that we talked about, I think, in the Downtown Theater episode. Yeah. He was accused of raping someone in the Pantages Theater or something.
No, he accused someone else of doing that.
That's right. Good guy. Not a rapist. Good guy.
Yeah.
RFK was completely shattered after he lost his brother, and for the rest of his life, he was apparently consumed by feeling both guilt of losing his brother and also disbelief in the official story. During his speech at CSUN, students shouted at him, asking him who really killed his brother.
Wow.
And classy from the beginning.
Yeah.
And in a rare public address of his personal feelings about that incident, he said that if he became president, he would make those files public and get to the bottom of what really happened.
Wow.
Meanwhile,
and that put a target on him.
Yeah. From then on, he had this weird red dot on his forehead. Meanwhile, RFK was sweeping through the primaries. Think Donald Trump, but good.
Oh, I can't.
Donald Trump, but white. He was splitting a lot of the vote with the other leading Democrat, Eugene McCarthy, but the things RFK was promising and what he came to symbolize were winning more and more people over. Like, he was pro-civil rights and anti-Vietnam. That made him popular among Mexican and African Americans. Yeah. After what the country had been through in the past 5 years, he wanted to reunite the country in the name of peace and understanding and racism.
Good old-fashioned, I don't like you.
Good old-fashioned Boston Irish racism. He would often state, we can do better. So he believed in us. He believed in the country. He's Harvey Dent. He's half of Harvey Dent.
He is half of Harvey Dent. Yeah, okay. That's funny.
People hoped he would be able to end the Vietnam War and bring racial harmony. They looked to him for change. It doesn't sound very different from what it was like when Obama was running for president, or a lot of what's surrounding Bernie Sanders right now. Only for RFK, he actually probably would have won won compared to Bernie Sanders. On June 4th, he won the California primary and was about to receive the Democratic presidential nomination and would have gone on to face against Richard Nixon, and he certainly would have beaten Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
He was 42 years old. I was even younger than his brother was when he became president, and there was just so much positivity and so much hope surrounding him. He wouldn't live long past June 4th. So let's take a look at where RFK was on June 4th when the country fell apart yet again in the 1960s. The Ambassador Hotel. It was designed by Myron Hunt. It opened January 1st, 1921, New Year's Day.
New Year's Day?
At 3400 Wilshire Boulevard, across the street from the original Brown Derby would open up a few years later. At the opening party, there were 3,000 guests there, including Mrs. Doheny, whose son would be murdered a few years later. Not an assassination.
Plain old murder.
Yeah, good old-fashioned American murder.
Who done it? Not why done it.
The hotel was 8 stories high with 512 rooms spread out over 25 acres of land. Strangely, RFK was staying in room 512 the night he was killed. Spoiler alert. Inside the hotel was the Coconut Grove nightclub, which was a huge movie star hotspot and was furnished with palm trees from the set of Rudolph Valentino's The Sheik.
What episode did we talk about the Coconut Grove?
Have we ever talked about it?
Yeah, I talked about it. I just don't remember what episode.
Oh, the coconut episode.
Oh, yeah, all coconuts. We were on Gilligan's Island, remember?
Yeah, remember that one? Both Bing Crosby and Merv Griffin started their singing careers here at the Coconut Grove. There was also an iconic coffee shop inside designed by Paul R. Williams, who also did the Fountain Coffee Room in the Beverly Hills Hotel, which we ate at once.
It was expensive and nice.
The bill was my favorite part. He also designed the theme building at LAX and parts of the Nazi compound Murphy Ranch.
Oh, wow, he's like getting around.
Yeah, well, come on.
He's a Nazi.
What do you expect? He was also the first black member of the Nazi Party. First black member of the American Institute of Architects, and would not have been served inside the very coffee shop he designed because it wasn't integrated until the 50s. The first black person to stay at the Ambassador Hotel was Lena Horne, who decided to stay there instead of the Dunbar Hotel, which she normally stayed at. Howard Hughes and Gloria Swanson lived here for a while. Every president from Hoover to Nixon stayed here. Marilyn Monroe signed with her first modeling agency at the hotel, and the Fitzgeralds once set fire to their bungalow during a visit.
Ha ha ha. Ain't that them?
This place is like, it's steeped in the lore of our characters from past episodes.
It certainly is, yeah.
This part of Wilshire was pretty much just a dirt road when they opened, and boy, isn't it still.
Oh my God.
But their presence promoted the development of the whole area, and eventually they held 6 Oscar ceremonies here. Over 400 people worked there on any given day in its prime. But on the night of June 4th, there were only about 244 people on staff, and already the hotel and the surrounding area were starting to get run down. So the California primaries had been that day, June 4th, and RFK was up in the royal suite waiting for the results to come in with his staff and wife and a few celebrities, including Milton Berle.
Old horse part himself?
Yeah, he needed room 513 to keep the door open between the two. I want to get comfortable. Late at night, it became clear that he was the Democratic winner, so he was to go downstairs into the embassy ballroom to give his victory speech. To avoid a crowd, they took the service elevator and went through the kitchen, and a little after midnight, RFK gave his speech, and at 12:14 a.m., he ended his speech with, "Now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there," while the crowd chanted, "We want Bobby! We want Bobby! We want Bobby! We want Bobby! We want Bobby!" Aye, Bobby.
Aye, Bobby. I'm so scared.
You should be.
I know it happens, but it's still...
Now, the plan was to go to another room to thank his team and meet some press before heading out to the Factory at 661 North Robertson Boulevard, which is a disco bar near the Troubadour. There was one thing Robert F. Kennedy liked more than politics. It was disco dancing.
It was bell-bottom disco dancing.
So they were going to go there for a private party, but at the last second, the route he was supposed to take to get to the other room was changed, and he was to go through the kitchen again to avoid some media people. Let's pause for a second to talk about RFK's stance on personal security.
Oh, boy.
He was not a fan. He often ignored the advice of the security he was given and would say, if they're going to shoot, they'll shoot. And shoot they did. The LAPD offered, this is interesting. The LAPD offered protection, but he explicitly refused them because he knew their reputation and he didn't want anything to do with them, especially since he was on the side of the people the LAPD were usually victimizing. Despite that, our old friends at the Rampart Police Station deployed 4 cars to be around the hotel that day.
Haunted!
But at this time, just after midnight, they had all gotten other calls and were off framing people for crimes elsewhere in the city.
Alibis.
RFK's security advisor was William Barry, and he had a private security guard from Ace Guard Service and a guy named Thane Eugene Caesar, and he had a small entourage of celebrities surrounding him. Milton Berle's member was Almost Human Shield.
Almost human. Come on, an animal part shield.
A human producing shield. So he had this, he had this little entourage, celebrities and whatnot, and he left the stage, but apparently he was walking very fast, faster than usual, and he was going far ahead of his entourage, and they were having trouble keeping up. And they kept telling him, slow down, but he said, I will not slow down. He just wouldn't stop. And into the kitchen he went, as I wrote, which was filled with 77 people, many of them hotel staff, and he was stopping to shake hands with almost everybody as his entourage tried to catch up to him. Yeah. He was shaking hands with a busboy when a man named Sirhan, the man so evil they named him twice. He walked up, pulled an Ivor Johnson Cadet 22 revolver from his waist, and lunged at RFK. His first shot hit RFK in the head, behind the right ear, into the brain. The next two went into his right armpit and up through his neck, and then a fourth went through his coat but didn't hit him. Unfortunately for Sirhan, part of RFK's entourage were Rayford Johnson, a former UCLA athlete, and Roosevelt Greer, an ex-Ram player, who grabbed Sirhan immediately and almost choked him to death until he had to be yelled at to stop.
Why would someone stop him?
Sirhan still had 4 bullets left, and he kept firing until he was out, while other members of the crowd started grabbing Sirhan and they tried to restrain him, including George Plimpton.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, everyone was there. Everyone who was anybody was at the RFK
People who weren't born yet were there.
Kim Kardashian came out and
she piggybacked on Michael J. Fox's back.
They tied Sirhan down with a belt and they pinned him onto one of the tables, but that was a lot of bullets to fly around in a small crowded area. The first 3 hit RFK, but the fourth that went through his coat and didn't hit him hit a man named Paul Schrade in the head, but he managed to survive. Also shot were William Weisel, Elizabeth Evans, Ira Goldstein, who was 19, and Erwin Stoll, who was only 17.
Jesus.
Meanwhile, presidential hopeful RFK was down. There's a famous picture of RFK on the ground, still holding the hand of the busboy he was thanking. Yeah. It's so sad. This 17-year-old kid's name was Juan Romero. He went to Roosevelt High School and came from a family, as most Mexican families did, who loved RFK. Yeah. Romero specifically was grateful to him for the way he had treated him during his stay at the hotel. When RFK went down, Romero put the rosary beads he had in his pocket into RFK's hand. As RFK said to him, "Is everybody okay?" Romero responded, "Yes, everybody's okay." And RFK continued to say, "Everything's going to be okay." Those and a few moans of, "Oh, Ethel," which is his wife, those were his last words.
Oh, that hurts a lot.
Romero had to go to school the next day with RFK's blood still under his fingernails.
Wow.
Yeah, that really affected me.
Yeah, that's traumatic.
Yeah, from then on, even the day after, people would hound him about the incident and they wanted pictures of him, with him for years. He, moved away from LA. He, couldn't take it. Yeah. Even today, he feels guilty that maybe if RFK hadn't stopped to shake his hand, he would still be alive. So this kid has to, he's not a kid anymore, but
he's an old man.
He has to deal with this forever. At 12:23, an ambulance arrived to take RFK to the Central Receiving Hospital at 6th and Loma, right next to the Rampart Station, where he was somewhat stabilized, and then at 12:45 was transferred to the Good Samaritan Hospital at 1212 Chateau, where he arrived at 12:48, unconscious still. At 3:10, he entered surgery until 6:20, where they were able to get most of the bullet out of his brain, and he was able to breathe on his own. He was still not conscious and was taken into intensive care. By his side were his wife, his sisters, his brother-in-law, Jackie Kennedy, and also James Al Poppin, who was the head of neurosurgery at the Leahy Clinic in Boston that they flew in on an Air Force plane. But at 1:44 a.m. on June 6, 1968, the second Kennedy in 5 years, RFK was pronounced dead.
My God.
He left behind 11 children and his pregnant wife. His body was taken back to New York for a ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral, attended by his wife, Jackie Kennedy, and Coretta Scott King, the 3 major widows, a super group of widows from the 1960s.
Supremes of widows.
And he was buried at Arlington Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, back at that night at the hotel, police showed up and arrested Sirhan, who had refused to give his name, so he was taken in as John Doe. They traced his gun to a suburb in Alabama, where it was then sold in Marin County, then to an 18-year-old in Pasadena, Pasadena who said he sold it to a bushy-haired guy named Joe who worked in a department store. This Joe was identified as Munir Bishari Salameh Sirhan's brother, who in turn identified Sirhan to the police. So with his identity out, Sirhan confessed to the murder but pleaded not guilty. He said initially, and his story is going to change a lot, he said that RFK was once his hero, but when RFK came out in support of Israel and had publicly promised to send 50 fighter jets to Israel if elected, Sirhan said he felt betrayed, Sirhan being Palestinian. After he was arrested, he said, "I can explain it. I did it for my country."
Okay, not good enough.
Well, in that case, back to Pasadena with you. He said he did it to protect Palestinians, even though he was not actually affiliated with any Palestinian groups. Sirhan admitted to having pre-planned the murder and seemed to have considered other pro-Israel targets as well, and had written in his diary, which we'll get more into later, that he wanted RFK dead by June 5th, which was the one-year anniversary of the Six-Day War in Israel. For this reason, RFK's assassination is seen by a lot of people as the first time the violence of the Middle East bled into America.
Right.
The modern issues in Israel had only been going on for about a year at this point, and just a month after this were the first plane hijackings by the Palestine Liberation Organization.
That happened that?
Yeah.
Really?
When Black September took the Saudi Arabian embassy hostage in 1973, one of their demands was even to release Sirhan. He went to trial where he said quite a lot of anti-Semitic things, and his lawyers argued that Sirhan was mentally unstable and didn't know what he was doing. But on April 17th, 1969, he was convicted of premeditated murder, and on April 23rd, he got sentenced to death. But in 1972, California got rid of the death penalty, so it was changed to life in prison.
Which is what Charles Manson is stuck under, yeah.
That's what he's enjoying right now.
Yeah.
He'll come up later, actually.
Oh, really?
Now, who was Sirhan?
Who was Sirhan?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sirhan Bishara Sirhan was born in 1944 in the Palestinian part of Jerusalem as part of a Christian family. In 1957, his family was sponsored by some churches in America to move to the United States, first stopping in New York before settling down in Pasadena at 696 East Howard Street. Sirhan went to John Muir High School and then to Pasadena Community College, where he was expelled in 1964 for bad grades and attendance.
Let me tell you what he did attend.
He was just going to too many political rallies. He went on to spend a lot of time in the Pasadena Library and got a job as a horse exerciser at Santa Anita Racetrack until 1966 when he fell off a horse. An accident that his lawyers later tried to use as proof that he wasn't in his right mind when he killed RFK. The horse did it.
The horse did it. He was horse crazy. Mad horse disease.
Assassin's an assassin, of course. Now let's get into the weird stuff.
Okay.
After this, Sirhan, after his accident, this horse accident, Sirhan became very mystical and felt that he could control things with his mind.
Okay.
Logical.
Well, there we go.
This might explain why witnesses said he had a very concentrated look on his face while he was shooting RFK. For a while, he was Baptist and then a Seventh-day Adventist, but in June 1966, he joined the Rosicrucians, who seemed to be very interested in the occult, which brings us to the conspiracy theories.
Yes.
Oh, where to begin with the conspiracy theories? Like I said, Sirhan changed his story a lot over the years.
Yeah.
At first, he said it was about Israel, then he said he was just really drunk, then he said he didn't remember anything about the shooting. In 1970 were the first suggestions that there had to have been a second shooter.
Why was that?
Well, you can't have a Kennedy assassination without a second shooter.
It's a requirement, it's a prerequisite. Okay, and who's your second shooter?
No, I used a magic bullet. There are several people that were there that night who claim to have seen people other than Sirhan with guns. Some even claim to have seen a man running out of the kitchen after the shooting with a partially concealed gun, but the figure most people who believe in this theory focus on is a blonde woman in her early 20s with a pug nose in a polka dot dress that was not like the one you're wearing, pug nose Greg, that used to be a woman.
I gotta go.
I gotta go to the Pasadena Library.
I'll see you at the Coconut Grove.
So she was wearing a polka dot dress, and she was seen running with a man from the kitchen, yelling in joy, "We shot him, we shot him." This woman was seen by multiple people, some of whom reported it to the police when they arrived at the scene, who put out the word to the rest of the police to look out for this woman for 2 hours until their officer reportedly told them, "We've got our man, let's not make a federal case out of this." The cop who put out the notice for them said he had filed reports on her, but the reports disappeared. The woman in the polka dot dress was never found. Once word spread of this polka dot girl, though, people came out as having claimed to have seen her and Sirhan and the second man she was running away with before the incident. Supposedly, Sirhan and the polka dot girl had aggressively tried to get into Robbie's restaurant in Pomona, where RFK was eating on May 20th, with Sirhan having a heavy jacket over his arm. 10 days after that, a campaign worker for RFK recalled that a young woman and and 2 men had approached them trying to get a copy of RFK's schedule. On June 1st, a guy was hiking with his son in the Santa Ana Mountains where he said he saw a very hostile Sirhan with a girl and another guy shooting pistols. Sirhan was also reportedly seen on June 4th at a shooting range and at the Ambassador Hotel itself 2 days before the killing, trying to learn its layout. A guy named Jerry Owen later said he was supposed to meet Sirhan at the hotel the night of the shooting to sell him a horse, which is weird, and the police dismissed the story, but it's interesting to remember that Sirhan did used to work with horses.
Yeah.
So it's a weird lie to make up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stories suggesting Sirhan was stalking RFK well before the shooting and that he may or may not have had accomplices, but the biggest inconsistencies come from the crime scene itself.
Okay.
To start, Sirhan's gun could only hold 8 bullets, all of which were accounted for since they were shot into people. A couple had missed and gone into the ceiling, but they were retrieved. However, there were 2 extra bullets found lodged in the doorframe.
Oh.
The authorities decided that it wasn't bullets, but just damage on the doorframe from a food cart hitting it, and it was not used as evidence and promptly destroyed after the trial.
Of course it was destroyed.
Yeah. There were also at least 4 people there who claimed that they might have heard more than 8 shots fired. The ballistics testing on the official bullets even showed them to not have all come from the same gun.
Wow.
But things here get confusing because there's reason to believe that the bullets had been swapped in the evidence room and they had to recreate some of the bullets, and these recreated bullets were what they used as evidence in the trial, not the real bullets.
Wow.
So things got really kind of messy. Even the gun itself used as evidence in the trial was not the actual murder gun because the LAPD had messed up the gun while test firing it. So they made some sort of recreation and further testing of the gun could not be done. I don't know the full implications of that, but it sounds really shady.
Yeah.
There's also a recording that surfaced in 2004 by CNN that is the only known recording from that night that was reportedly made by a reporter 40 feet from the action that has the clear sound of 13 different shots being fired. The tape has been analyzed by experts and has been deemed authentic, and that the extra 5 shots are not echoes or ricochets. Some of the shots were even fired too rapidly to have possibly come from the gun that Sirhan was using, and they were also at different frequencies, meaning they were different guns. Still not convinced? Let's look at the autopsy report.
Convince me.
Get the corpse in here. If you look here,
We need the bone saw.
the bullets that entered RFK came from behind him and up at a sharp angle and were shot from about an inch away. Sirhan was face to face with RFK and shot from about 2 to 5 feet away.
So why are they all zany?
So that points all of our conspiratorial eyes at the only person that could have been in that position, his hired bodyguard, the 3 named Thane Eugene Caesar, who was standing behind RFK at the time and was supposedly very right-wing and anti-Kennedy.
Wow.
Caesar claimed he never fired his gun, but they were never able to check to see if that was true because he sold it after the incident, and then the gun got stolen from the person he sold it to. But it was also a .22 revolver, we know that much. Mm-hmm. These second shooter theories were even given thorough investigation by Vincent Bugliosi.
Oh, of the Manson trials.
Yep.
Vincent Bela Lugosi, as I call him.
Yeah, he's coming. But the theory that Sirhan's defense team is most attached to now was first put forward by none other than Truman Capote, that Sirhan had been, here we go, hypnotized, Manchurian Candidate style, to kill RFK.
Okay.
Weirdly enough, RFK's last meal earlier that night had been spent at the house of John Frankenheimer, the director of The Manchurian Candidate.
Very odd.
Like I said, Sirhan now says he doesn't remember the event or even writing in his diary, RFK must die, over and over again, which they say he wrote in a trance.
Okay.
Analysis done by his defense team have shown Sirhan to be very susceptible to hypnotism, so they believed he was hypno-programmed to kill RFK and then forget that he did it and who had programmed him.
The blonde lady.
The blonde lady and the horse. He was hypnotized by the horse, by the pug-nosed horse. A memory expert worked with Sirhan for 3 years and claims that he recalls that at the time of the shooting, he believed he was in a gun range shooting at targets, and that he also remembers hearing other guns and flashes going off. Wow. They believe he was either hypno-programmed by the Rosicrucians or by a political organization, in particular, the CIA, which leads to the government did it theory that the government killed RFK because he was against the Vietnam War and they wanted to keep it going.
To sell Jeeps.
So that they could sell Jimi Hendrix CDs 30 years later. People suspect the notorious and maybe fake CIA secret agent Khyber Khan of being involved. People also claim to have spotted other CIA operatives who were supposed to be in Asia at the time in the photos from that night at the hotel, such as David Sanchez Morales, who is credited with causing most of the political upheavals that happened in South South America and also reportedly hated the Kennedys. He was once quoted saying to a group of friends, "I was in Dallas when we got the son of a bitch, and I was in Los Angeles when we got the little bastard."
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, little nicknames for him.
Yeah, they're cute.
Adorable.
Some people suspect the mafia did it because RFK was active in taking down organized crime.
Yeah.
Aside from those grand theories, there's also just some good old-fashioned shady doings surrounding all of this investigation. A 15-year-old photographer there that night got his camera taken away from him, and his film was never returned. Sirhan's lead attorney, Grant Cooper, was under federal indictment for conduct in a separate case during the time of Sirhan's trial, and then after Sirhan got sentenced, all charges against Cooper were dropped. The LAPD set up a special unit senator committee to investigate, but a lot of things were ignored by them, and not every avenue was explored, and their tactics were questionable. One of the polka dot girl witnesses had been pestered into redacting her story by telling her over and over, "You did not see anybody in a polka dot dress," until she was finally like, "Okay, I didn't see it." And then they used her redaction to discredit all the other witnesses.
Wow.
The prosecutors didn't even give Sirhan's defense team the autopsy report until 4 months into the trial, and the defense didn't even want to use most of the evidence because it would have shown admission of premeditation and that accomplices were involved, and that would have made the case worse for him. And then, of course, there's the reasonable side of all of these conspiracies.
Maybe JFK did it.
JFK came back from the grave. He teamed up with Martin Luther King.
And a Marilyn Monroe impersonator.
They used Joe DiMaggio's baseball bat and did it. Maybe the polka dot dress girl wasn't yelling, "We shot him." Maybe she was yelling, "He shot him."
Yeah.
Or maybe she was being dramatic and meant we as in the American people. There's evidence suggesting Sirhan was pretending to not remember writing in his journals because he knew how incriminating they were.
Yeah.
And he even reportedly told his lawyer to tell his mom to clean his room before the police came, probably hoping she'd see the notebooks and destroy them.
Yeah.
Maybe only Sirhan's first shot was from a foot away, and then RFK turned to protect himself, leaving the right parts of his body exposed. And in the confusion, Sirhan was able to get in closer. Maybe Thane Eugene Caesar did shoot RFK in the back of the head on accident, trying to hit Sirhan.
Right.
But hey, conspiracies are fun.
Yeah, they are fun.
Sirhan spent some time at California State Prison in Corcoran and was actually locked up near Charles Manson. Special cell block for him. He was also accused of somehow being forewarned of the September 11th attacks. He is now in the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility near San Diego. He's 71 years old. Sirhan first went up for parole on May 30th, 1975. He's been denied 15 times now.
Keep at it.
Most recently,
we like denying you.
Persistence is key. Most recently, on February 9th, 2016, that was his last denial. He's up again every 5 years. His defense team, now being led by William F. Pepper, who also won a case in 1999 asserting that the Memphis police were involved in Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Yeah. They're pushing for a retrial given all the new evidence and the ignored evidence like that sound recording, and they claim that the evidence department was working with the prosecution. They maintain he was hypno-programmed and was the fall guy for a greater plot because he's Arabic and they knew he would easily be blamed.
Okay.
Sirhan insists he was in some sort of a trance and shouldn't be held responsible for it. Paul Schrade, the man who had also been shot in the head that night, was actually at his last hearing to forgive Sirhan, and he too believes there was more than one shooter, and he pleaded for Sirhan's release.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, he got shot in the head. Yeah.
He doesn't know.
Yeah, come on, he's
I
wacky.
guess 2 people are hypno-programmed now.
The way the parole board sees it, Sirhan does not show remorse and fails to understand the seriousness of what he did. The real hero of the story, the Ambassador Hotel, has already seen its death sentence carried out. Yep. After a couple more decades of decline, the Ambassador closed in 1989, at which point it was bought by none other than Charles Manson.
I got ideas.
We all live in one room, man. It was bought by, one guess.
Eli Broad.
Worse. Donald Trump.
Oh!
He bought it.
Let's kill another Kennedy there.
Invite Ted. He's dead. Ted. The loser.
Ted Kennedys.
The Ted Kennedys. So he bought it for $64 million to be raised and turned into a 125-story office building. Unfortunately, he had bought it out from under the LAUSD, who was interested in the land. LAUSD didn't like this and had the school board vote 7-0 to seize the land from Trump under eminent domain.
Ha-ha.
Of course, Trump, the official ruling, yoink. Of course, Trump didn't like this, so he launched a counterattack, which led to years of of litigation and protests in front of the abandoned hotel with people chanting, "Dump Trump, dump Trump, dump Trump. We want Bobby." During those years, a lot of movies were filmed at the hotel during the Trump years, such as The Mask, who used the Coconut Grove as the Coco Bongo nightclub.
That's right.
While the hotel was still in operation, they had also filmed The Graduate there. By 2001, Trump had lost the fight and the land belonged to the LAUSD, who planned to build 3 schools there to service the densely populated area.
Koreatownish.
Yeah. The issue then became on whether or not to preserve the hotel and its legacy or to completely demolish it to make room and turn our back on the city's history yet again. The LA Conservancy and the Art Deco Society sued to prevent the hotel's demolition and suggested the school be housed inside the hotel.
Ah, that's not a bad idea. PE in the Coconut Grove?
Yeah. Sirhan's defense team got involved to protect it as well because they wanted to do acoustic tests in the kitchen.
Okay.
The Kennedys wanted the place destroyed for obvious reasons. The Mexican...
They're also trying to blow up Dallas.
Wipe it off the map. We don't need to be reminded.
Only the book depository survived.
The Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund countersued because they didn't want any money that could be going towards a good school for children to be wasted on preserving this old building. In 2006, they came to a sort of compromise where most of the hotel was raised, but the coffee shop is now a teacher's lounge. The Coconut Grove is now a theater, and the Embassy Ballroom is now a library, and the kitchen is where detention is. In 2010, the 3 schools serving K through 12 opened to serve some 4,200 students. It cost $578 million, making it the most expensive public school in U.S. history, just what RFK would have wanted.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
The part of Wilshire in front of it was renamed Robert F. Kennedy Parkway. It's not exactly definitively clear why RFK was killed or who did it. And after it happened, they made it so that presidential candidates get Secret Service protection within 120 days of the election so that nothing like this ever happens again. But what this assassination did was it really killed the country's optimism. By the late 60s, people were starting to see that there was something deeply wrong with the very character of the United States. As Life magazine put it, the nation in less than 6 years has watched the violent deaths of 2 Kennedys and a king. So the feeling was like, what am I going to wake up to tomorrow? What major figure is going to be killed today? What horrible violence am I going to see on the news tonight? And understandably, people started losing hope in peace because they saw that it wasn't working and maybe violence was okay now. That led to cynicism, and American culture started to feel like it was falling apart. Vice President Hubert Humphrey ran in RFK's place and lost to the root of all cynicism, Nixon, and we all know what the 70s was like. RFK was the 60s' last hope of change, and there's no way we'll ever know what he could have done for our country.
Devastating.